Hello, people. TGIF. We got a show for you today. Old World Energy with Leaving Babylon. Welcome back to the show, Madeline. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm great. I'm happy to be here. This is fun. I like lives. I don't do any other lives, so this is great. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's good. Like I said, I've cornered the market on Leaving Babylon, doing live streams, and I'm good with that. The people, I'm sure, are happy about that. So, yeah. So, I mean, this topic is something that I think that it's a good. I don't know how the right way to phrase this, but it's like if there was a millennial reign, wouldn't there possibly be evidence that there was something more advanced than we have today? And I think the idea of antiquitech, free energy, all that kind of stuff, I think that actually could be a pretty good evidence if this thing already happened.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the fact that they've tried so hard to cover it all up just tells you it's part of a great deception, just like everything else, right? So it's just another layer of deception that we have been exposed to or, traumatized by, however you want to think about it, considering the fact that they charge us for energy. So something I like to think about, not like to think about, but I like to mention is that if you think about it, charging your car, you get charged to charge. So this word play of like charging is
Right.
also kind of interesting. So you plug in your car, but then you also get charged money for the electricity. So everything is on this profit sort of basis, and that's obviously something that we're dealing with. We're realizing more and more is that the way that they've harnessed all these energies is profiting only one group of people. It's keeping us in submission, and it's a very subversive tactic against us, and I would say ultimately against God, because they are trying to control those natural energies that God gave to us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, you think about it too. It's if they've managed in this time we live in to monetize things that are really should not be should cost money because it's like interesting when you hear like the stories of like the Native Americans. If any of this is true, they didn't believe that anyone owned the land, right?
Right.
But you need to buy the place you live, the plot of land. You need to pay taxes on it. You need even if you built your own house, if you stop paying taxes, it was all paid for. They would take it away from you.
Yeah.
And so if you imagine if you lived in a time where you could build your house where the free land is, and then there was a way where you could actually have energy to heat it, to cool it, whatever else you need to do with it. I mean, imagine how much more free we would be. And I mean, I think that like we live, I live in the land of the free, supposedly. But I mean, I think what we really have become is free range slaves is like that.
Yeah.
We have a play, like an invisible fence that we can't go past. And if you think about it, like in the same way that if you charge your car, like, the people who have electric cars, it only goes but so far. And it's even funny too, when they talk about clean energy. Okay. So because you're plugging in your car to get energy, it's almost like they have no idea how the power plants get the energy when most of them are powered by coal. So it's the power plant is powered by something that's not a clean, renewable energy. And you think, like the ignorance about people thinking all you have to do is plug your car in and electricity comes out the wall, just like it's just like it's always there.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, if energy is free, do you think they would let us have it for free?
No, absolutely not. It's funny, like one of the original almost conspiracy theories. You go back to like the 70s show when they used to like, get high around like the little circle and they talk about there was a guy who invented an engine. It ran on water. And of course, the original conspiracy about that is obviously that guy ended up unalived.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, if somebody profits off selling petroleum products, it's interesting that guy's the same guy who basically is credited with the modern education system. So the people who profit off of selling the energy, well, that's made them rich beyond measure.
Yeah.
So why would they ever let something be free that would replace? There would be no need for them.
Right. And I propose that they actually get it for free. There's nothing they are doing other than building the structure that hides it so that we don't know they're getting it for free. And then they just sell it to us. It's like almost no cost other than the workforce that they have kind of running around putting up all their constructions, you know. But yeah, I think they get it for free, 100%. And even just on the matter of coal, you know that the whole coal production thing was actually created as a tear down system. So it was another layer of that infrastructure that they created. So they created the coal industry. Prior to that, they had actually clean um, gas, right? So natural gas. Natural gas was free way before coal, and people were using it. So between the ether, between the atmospheric electricity, and the free gas energy, not to mention steam, which is just water heated up, right?
Right.
So all of these very clean, free energies were kind of like re-infrastructured, so that now they were reliant on coal, which is why when you see London, old pictures of London, very foggy, very smoggy, you know, old Europe is like that because they replaced that clean natural gas with coal energy. So that's just something, because even if you go way back, they had gas lighting way before they had coal. So this is like their build up to tear down system, and that is how they control the supply and demand, and they can also, you know, manage the market. So they can control how much things are worth. They can control how much you can use it, how much it's going to cost you, and all the rest of it. So yeah, very subversive.
Well, they also have like the artificial scarcity of resources too, where I think I'm at the point now where I fully buy into the idea that they lie about the world population. It's way smaller than they say it is.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys anybody's ever looked into this, but if you start adding up all the major cities around the world, like whatever they say the population is, I think it's about 2.5 million people or something like that, maybe like a $2 million or 2 billion range. And so then you'd have to believe that there's like almost 6 billion people not living in cities, which again, like in rural areas, I mean, the math doesn't math. And so when you think about like the idea of fossil fuels, and I guess this gets into like the dinosaur hoax stuff, where they literally try to tell people that oil is created by old dinosaurs. And obviously we're going to run out of dead carcasses of animals, and then one day it'll be gone. When they actually say, there was a guy, I think in the oil business, he was saying that there is, besides water, the second most prevalent fluid on Earth is oil. It's likely that the Earth continues to make it, and it is. I mean, for lack of a better word, it probably is more renewable than people realize. It's like we would never run out of it.
No, I agree. It's just like a replenishing supply that God put there. But yeah, they do want to make us dependent on electricity that they are metering and they are charging. And the same goes for cars. I mean, that's exactly why they want you to charge your car, because now they can limit your ability to access that.
Yes, I think that was the one thing that it just makes so much sense that if they moved everyone to electrical cars, obviously they have access to being able to, for one, they can manipulate these things, even if you didn't have a range on them. But then you hear these stories where people are not allowed to go to the charging stations. These things already have a limited range, and then like certain people would not be able to charge their cars. And to me, I think that makes actually sense that that's why they would do it, is because they want to be able to control your movement on this plane. They don't want you to be able to go wherever you want to. And I think it is interesting in America, like there is that kind of that mythos of like the idea of getting on the highway, putting the top down and being free. You know, you think about even like those biker movies where they like literally they can just go do whatever they want to, but it's like they don't really want you to be able to do that.
That's right. And just the point of the mining that is required to do to create those electrical batteries for the cars, that is not renewable. Like that is the worst plan ever. If you see the huge nickel and lithium mines that they've been digging the earth for. Like that stuff doesn't grow back. They're just
Yeah.
making huge craters in the earth, like everywhere, probably in poor countries because nobody's
Yes.
going there to see it and they can hide it better. But it's absolutely disgusting.
100%.
Yeah.
So do you want to get into the presentation? Should I show a little bit? I said I don't know if we want to do this yet, but I clipped part of the lost history of flat Earth, because if you guys are not familiar with the idea of Antiquitech, old world buildings, how they might have been able to harness electricity, I could show you a little bit of that. Or Madeline, if you want to present your thing first.
Yeah, you go ahead, JT, and I can go after. Cool.
Okay, guys. So this is, if you guys have already seen the lost history of flat Earth, this might be a good reminder. If you guys have not, this is pretty interesting. And I know this guy Erwan or whatever, he he recanted his statements, which makes me believe that he never was the one who did any of this research anyways, and he was likely just the voice. Some people say that he stole some of this stuff. Regardless, I think most people who are in this in do this kind of research say that documentary was put together very well, and it was pretty comprehensive as far as like the things that we kind of believe. So let me show you that, and you guys just can just relax a little bit and tell me what you guys think.
Yes.
All right, we'll just keep it there for right now, so we won't watch too much of it. But yeah, so you get an idea of that the domes, the antennas, all the things that these were more than just for aesthetics. These things had some kind of practical value, and I mean it makes just perfect sense also that if these people, let's just say even based on the narrative, that these people were more primitive than us, like would they really spend so much time building these completely ornate antenna looking things, spiked antennas and domes, if they didn't have some kind of a practical value to them too? Like they weren't just about looks?
Well, yeah, I mean, you do have to question the narrative against what our eyes are showing us, right? So all these ancient structures that were allegedly built in the Middle Ages, which is when they tell us People couldn't even read. They couldn't, do math or whatever. They had no education. They were poor. They were being tormented by plagues and war and all of this sort of historical fabrication to say that basically don't consider what they did. And then they give all the credit to people like the Freemasons and basically the guys who have now taken over. So yeah, it just doesn't add up. And I think if we start thinking logically, like most of us do, we don't trust the narrative anyway. So kind of exposes itself, really.
Right. I think the one thing that I've learned a lot about doing research into history is that people have always been people, right? People have never been stupid. People have the same kind of motivations as we do. And I think that's why, like, you can learn a lot from the Bible and how people reacted to each other thousands and thousands of years ago, because people in general are the same. That's why the lies from the serpent still work the same as they did from the very beginning. And so when you would say, why would they build that? Why would they spend so much money to build that? Why would they put so much resources into building things like that? And then you're thinking like, well, we don't do that now. Like the things that we don't do now, why did they do them then? And why would somebody, because they always just say like, oh, they get some poor peasants or slaves to build these things. When you realize those are the things that cause revolutions, is oppressing people and making a make useless monuments to kings.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't work. So I think that to me, it's like these people did not live in shacks and then go spend all their days building castles and cathedrals and all that stuff. That just makes no sense. You would build buildings, the houses people lived in would be on par with kind of the general construction techniques. But then you see what they're showing that people lived in. They're all these misshapen houses in like the 1800s, like that literally look like they just got scrap wood and just nailed them together. Everything, nothing's level. Meanwhile, when they go to their day job, I guess they're making perfect stone forms and just the most immaculate shapes and, domes and antennas that you can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, my family emigrated from Eastern Europe before the 1900s or early 1900s and to Canada. And, you just think of, okay, they moved all that way. They had nothing really. And they were probably passing some of these amazing buildings. And then they had to dig their house out of a dirt hill and basically winter there for the year until the next year, until they could actually build something out of the trees that they had on the property and till the land. And, so it was really, it's a definite, they lost the ability to create this stuff. Right. Otherwise, as you say, it would just be common practice. People would just be doing it.
Right. It's interesting too, that you mentioned too, especially about Canada, and it's not, obviously not just unique to Canada. Canada obviously is an extreme example of this. But when you think about the timelines these buildings are built, we're told, okay, so you're going back a couple hundred years, and obviously, if you have your eye, the mind of what we've been taught about these things, how much construction would they be getting done in the middle of wintertime in Canada?
Exactly.
I would think not much. I would think it would be very difficult to do work like that. I mean, I've worked construction since I was a kid, and yeah, I'm like when we would, and I live in Virginia, so like cold days on the water, and it's like you don't even want to move. And we're going into spaces that are heated, and like, like stuff like drywall and stuff needs to be at a certain heat before you can, like the finishing will actually dry. It can't be too hot. It can't be too cold. Like all the kind of things that they would not be able to have temperature control over these things. And a lot of the craziest buildings probably in North America, they got these 1-year timelines. Or so obviously if it's New York,
I know
the winters are not that kind.
Yeah.
Chicago. You guys been to Chicago in the wintertime on that lake? It's freezing cold. Like you can imagine them trying to do stone and concrete and all that stuff in a year. Stop.
I know. Yeah. And just the roads as well. They always showed the dirt roads, and you imagine, okay, so they were building all these very heavy objects, right? They were transporting what would have been extremely heavy objects and horse and cart, so the wheels would have been digging in. I mean, I don't even want to imagine it. But then through the winter as well. So like not only do you have bad roads, but you have ice or you have snow, and yeah, it doesn't add up at all.
Yeah, we're even told in like because I really enjoyed like watching shows about World War II back in the day, and they talk about like when the Germans fought the Russians, and it was like really the winner defeated the Germans
Yeah,
because the Russian winner was just brutal, and they couldn't move their equipment. So
yeah,
what we're told is, and like we know what kind of equipment the Germans had. They had the most high tech stuff of the days in the 40s. But now you're talking about the 1840s, and you're talking about people with horses and buggies. Like your horse is not going to be able to last the winters either.
yeah,
So
exactly.
like your wooden carts and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's get out of here with that stuff. Wait, so obviously let's stop talking about how silly the narrative. Let's actually start talking about the possibilities of what's true. And if you want to start presenting your
Okay,
case for the Antiquitech.
sure. Let me just, I don't know if I can select a picture here. Let me see. I don't want to display my whole screen.
Well, I think you can do window, or you can do tab, or you can do entire screen. I think when you go to the share button.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Okay. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just going to move it a little bit on my screen. So something I've been realizing, because I've actually done quite a few of these conversations on another podcast. So Fringy Podcast, I've done a few of these. And so I have researched it quite a lot over the last, say, couple of years. And something that has stood out to me as I've rounded around these subjects is the energy. So let's just think for a minute, and I'm just going to place this in your mind. So the letter G. So let's just leave it there for a sec. But some people think that refers to God. So if we're talking about the Freemasons, they might use the letter G for God. They might use the letter G for gravity. So this is how they're kind of deceiving people. But I'm going to propose that it actually kind of encapsulates a lot of things. And I think the way that I prefer to start the conversation about free energy is to talk about biblical cosmology, because it really frames it in the right way. So if you can understand that our system is closed, like Bill Nye said, famously, I think they've been trying to backtrack on that actually, but he famously said that we cannot leave the earth. It is closed. It's a closed system. So we know that, but it's just good to get someone with a, sort of scientist outfit on saying that, so that other people can
We got the validation of a pretend scientist.
Yeah, mull that over a little bit. So when we talk about the shape of our realm, and it's enclosed within a dome, right? So you've got this hard surface over top of us, and you've got all the atmosphere inside it, which completely goes against the grain, because if like we've all been raised to think of this flying ball through space, gas is somehow magnetically sticking to the earth and keeping everything really peaceful and calm.
in a vacuum.
In a vacuum,
The gas is staying in the vacuum.
Exactly.
On this one spot.
Yeah. So so you can see, like, even just in nature, we can see that this is actually an enclosed realm, but even more than that, it's electrostatic. And this is really important because electrostatic atmosphere, so the charge in the atmosphere explains gravity. So we learn gravity as a profane science. They teach us garbage so that we don't understand the realm in which we live. And that's just something really important for everyone to realize. We live in a static environment. So there is literally electrostatic all around us. And you've experienced it, right? Like there's a thunderstorm and someone near you, their hair will be like floating up in the air.
Right.
Or you can play little experiments with static electricity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually just a representation of, and you can even see, so the finer that the hair is, the easier it will float up. So if it's nice and dry, it will actually float up in the electrostatic charge. And we have different levels of atmosphere. So the charge in the atmosphere is at different levels. So naturally, the higher up you go, the more charge you can actually collect. So when we're talking about the spires and the buildings and things like that, they have to go really high. because they actually get more charge. And I've seen people collecting charge from the atmosphere, doing experiments. Like you and I could do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll fly a drone up and they'll hang the wire from the drone with a string or something that's non-conductive, and it'll be attached like a motor down on the ground, and it will actually turn the motor. So there's, and they'll measure the charge that's coming down off the atmosphere. So this is actually happening on kind of a more basic level at the moment. People are starting to realize that the electricity is all around us. And so one of the demonstrations is just this. So the air is positively charged, the ground is negatively charged, and it's basically finding a balance on your body or on anything. Any kind of mass with a density, it pushes down because it's finding a grounding, right? So it's going to balance the charge in the mass that it finds. And that's why we stick to the ground. And this is just Gauss's law, which explains, the positive and the negative charge and how they basically just balance out. They find their level, right? And this is all related to energy because they can harness this directly from the air all around us. And these are just some examples of how these polarizations occur naturally within nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you get a thunderstorm, you get kind of this growing static electricity in the air, and you can actually get the lightning discharging to the ground, and that's just another example. And so you can see there that there's just more, up and down. Everything finds its own weight, which is why you weigh differently than someone else, because your density is charged differently to the person next to you. And so that's why you weigh more than another person. And that's just why biblical cosmology actually matters in this conversation. And that's, I think, partly why they hid biblical cosmology, because if we understand all of the mechanisms of the realm in which we live, we're going to just find out a lot more, right? So the more they hide in terms of science and the more they teach us garbage, the less aware we are of the environment that we live in. And so you can just see there's a lot more electrostatic electricity there. I want to show you, let me just stop sharing for a second. And they know this, this is not hidden information to them. This is really, this is well known. And this is why I say they're hiding it and they're using it for their own benefit. So you can see here, there's an abundance of energy latent in the heavens. This kind of whole thing, this whole myth around Prometheus actually has to do more with drawing power from the atmosphere and collecting the energy that way. And they even go so far as to call Earth an electrostatic generator. And so the atmosphere being charged and the Earth being negatively, charged, we have this polarization that happens. And they have apparatuses built for this, right? So all of these apparatuses, a long time ago, I would say during the millennial reign, were very well known. And what they've done is they've used the patent system to control what people can actually produce. So they have, this here is an apparatus for collecting atmospheric electricity. And you could go to the patent and you could find out exactly how to do it, right? Aerial energy collector. Capturing atmospheric electricity using aerial cables on Mont Blanc and also in Germany. So they've been doing this for a long time. And here's even all of the diagram drawings. And again, there's so many patents for this.
What about when Benjamin Franklin flew a kite with a key on it and he discovered electricity?
Well, exactly, right.
Isn't it funny just to think back? We were taught that. It was almost really think about how stupid that sounds. It's we have stories that we're taught as kids. And I guess the reason they teach us as kids is that Isaac Newton discovered gravity when he was sitting under a apple tree and a apple just bonked him on the head. And he's like, wait a minute, things fall down. Like, and this is like in the 1600s. Was it 1666? Of course, 3 sixes.
Yeah.
And then eventually in the 1770s or whatever, or I'm not sure, or 1760s, Benjamin Franklin discovers, hey, lightning's electric.
Right.
And before that, nobody had a clue.
Yeah.
Again, like to kids, it's like, well, obviously everyone was stupid before because they thought the earth was flat even. Like, so like they wouldn't know things fall down. They wouldn't know that the lightning was electric. It is, again, there was never a time where man was stupid. And then you think about it, biblically, the first man was probably way smarter than us because he got to walk with God and he lived for 900 years. Exactly. So like the things that he knew compared to what we know now, you couldn't even it's unbelievable.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this is being used right in our faces. Like, I think that, like a lot of the power grid that you see physically with your eyes, built up over the mountains and things like that. I think they're using these technologies to capture that free energy.
What about like HARP? I think HARP isn't that what they do? HARP is like, even they say they use something to try to interact with the ionosphere, and that's in Alaska, and they have all this antennas and everything.
Yeah, I think they're heating it up with microwaves or something, or allegedly.
What did they even say about HARP? Is they're trying to, they can send signals through the ionosphere? Is that something about that? But it makes sense too that the way it looked, the way that. I'll have to pull a picture up when I'll let you continue on your presentation, but I'll have to pull up a picture of HARP because it looks like. Let me see.
I'll just stop sharing.
Yeah, let me see if I can find a picture of like let's just see a picture of this thing. Yeah, let me share this real quick so you guys see that it's like, obviously this is dealing with some serious electricity. So frequency active auroral research program. Yeah. So obviously you see what it looks like. It's a bunch of antennas and they interact with the ionosphere. So whatever they say they're doing, believe them or not, I know they're interacting with energy high up in the sky.
Yeah, they are. I think what they're doing is microwaving the ionosphere, allegedly, but it's actually, they have a lot of these all over the earth, right? So it's not just the one, but it also allows them to manipulate weather. How else do you think? I always used to think it was weird that weather people were called meteorologists.
Right.
That's a weird thing, right? But actually, meteor, if you go back in the etymology, relates to any phenomenon in the sky. So it could be rain would be a meteor, snow would be a meteor, anything to do with the air is kind of meteor related. That's why they're called meteorologists. But I think they actually just get a script from HARP or wherever that tells them what's going to happen over the next 7 days.
That kind of makes sense. I did think about that, about like, even though they're still not great at predicting the weather, I wonder it'd be a lot easier to predict it when somebody tells you what's coming.
Agreed.
Like, how could you predict it that many days out? You know what I mean? Unless, how many, like, you check the forecast now, how many weeks out did they predict stuff?
Exactly.
But anyways, I'll let you continue.
Sure. I have a video to share just regarding the static electricity. It's only 2 minutes, so just give me a sec. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. That's cool.
Right? So you realize just how powerful static electricity is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. So I think just the fact that, just going back to the whole biblical cosmology thing, this is just, again, this is another reason why they hide so much from us. I'm not even sure, like I said, like I don't necessarily buy into the whole magnet toroidal thing, because I think that is a bit of an occult myth. I think it relies a bit on Black Sun kind of occultism and things like that. So I'm a little bit hesitant to blame what we have in this nature on things like toroids or even magnets, because the magnetic field can be actually explained in other ways, and we can get into that. So that was just one of the examples I wanted to share with people, because I don't think we realize how strong the electrostatic charge in our environment actually is. And I have another video.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
This one is actually showing, I won't play too much of this one, but it's showing, have you ever seen that video of the sprites that are coming down off the firmament? Those electrical.
I have not. I don't think so anyways.
Okay. So let me just get this.
It's interesting. Sprites are considered like spirits, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. We'll get to that for sure.
I've been hitting something, and this might be partly why they are lying about deep space and sending us all sorts of animations. Then I came across these sprites, which is a phenomenon known as upper atmospheric lightning, and people don't know about this. Your common person does not know about these things, and they occur way above clouds. Clouds are around 3.5 miles high. Sprites occur about 65, 70 miles high, where those rockets were coming to a stop. And these scientists, they show a documentary. This was by Nova. It was on PBS, and didn't really think much about it when I first saw it until I started putting the pieces together. And then I saw something, a barrier, light up above the sprite. And I thought, what if this is the firmament? And I analyzed this footage. I would slow this footage down. I would change the brightness, and sure enough, I started seeing what I thought I was seeing, the firmament. Put there by our Father in the story of creation. It's been there all along, and it's so sad that we've missed it and missed out on seeing His glory for our whole lives. But there it is, and you're about to see a wave move across it, kind of like the ripple you saw with the rocket. There's that wave, sprite shooting out of it. And yes, that's a wave. It's not a cloud that you're seeing light up. Again, this is many miles above the clouds. You are seeing the firmament. And this footage was taken down in another video that I put out and blocked in the United States. And for good reason. Because it's waking many people up. They are seeing this solid proof that there's a barrier that these things are shooting out of, these sprites that were mentioned in the book of Enoch. When it talked about stars rising up and becoming lightning and not losing their form, I thought that was crazy. That book was removed from the Bible, and it explained exactly how our system works, the math behind it and everything. But there's the firmament. You can see it. Again, draw your own conclusions. The fact that it's right where those rockets were stopping, is no coincidence.
So what do you think of that?
That's
You not seen that
interesting.
before?
That's interesting. Yeah, especially he brings up the book of Enoch, and even it mentions in the Testament of Solomon that the demons are saying that they're the shooting stars.
Right. Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah. So of course, yes, sprites. It's funny. Even my buddy Brian Demon Racers did a video today, and he was talking about sodas, and he was talking about Sprite. You know, Sprite comes from spirit,
Yeah.
and spirits are either angels, or you could say that they're demon spirits, or it's interesting. I mean, obviously, that's how the ancients would have identified these phenomenon.
Right. Exactly. And I think just that footage there is just amazing to see. I hope it doesn't affect your channel. Sorry. But yeah, so I think just, it just speaks to that whole, there's tons of electricity up there. And to be able to gather that is something they've been doing for a long time. Like, I don't believe, and this is just another theory I have, and take it with a pinch of salt, but I think that, and I think you may have mentioned this actually, that free energy is going to be part of a future, like, big reveal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be a big thing because everybody's all about, like, energy costs so much, all these bad forms of energy, blah, blah, blah. But I think they're actually going to, whether it be Trump or somebody else, they're going to be like, well, hey, now I'm the good guy, right? Because I can give you all free energy. And,
right.
And it's exposing itself anyway. So.
Well, yeah, you think about it, like how they've been talking for a while about, basic incomes and all this stuff for people who obviously they're going to be pushed out of the workforce by automation, AI, all the things. Imagine if they did, like you get to the point where unemployment's super high because, everything costs so much. And then they say, well, here's an option here. We'll give you free housing, free energy, free Wi-Fi. People are gonna be like, oh, well, that's all I really need anyways. And so actually, it's funny. I've queued this up because I figured we'd talk about this at some point. But I found this article, and I shared it last time when I was with Ceiling Fan Man. But this says the next world's tallest building could be a 3,000 feet high battery.
Wow.
And this whole article on CNN is all about the idea that they're going to make a skyscraper that's literally going to be able to harness energy. And
right.
that's literally what, in that Lost History of Flat Earth, they're talking about these certain towers and obelisks and all these things. They were used to store energy. And so, yeah, as there's nothing new under the sun, this is not new. This is something they've had. And to me, it's like an example of, are they, again, as like the 19th century into the 20th century, where technology just is going through the roof. Again, they didn't even know about electricity until Benjamin Franklin. And then eventually they learned about it. And then they're inventing everything that we use today. Things are becoming obsolete right away because new things continue to come out. I think they were saying, like, Nikola Tesla, he put in like thousands of patents. Almost like people like question whether he was legit, like, or was he reverse engineering some things, or was he just like an actor, like a lot of the famous scientists, and he was just taking credit for work that already been, stuff that already been invented for a long time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to me, it's kind of like, it makes sense to me that free energy now would be presented obviously as a godsend, but if they already have it and they're waiting to release it, it's obviously going to come with some strings.
Yeah.
More like chains than strings.
I would agree because they've only proven up to this point that their only interest is in furthering their own power, increasing our slavery, our dependency on their own structure. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why we see the destruction of all these old buildings, all the burning down of the cities, is because they had to tear it down to rebuild it in their own way so that they could profit from it. And they still do it. Like, I think a lot of the technology is still hidden in a lot of those old buildings. And they literally tore one down here in my city the other day. They just had it plastic wrapped. This is a big thing they're doing now. They're plastic wrapping these old buildings. And then when they take the plastic off, what have they done? Nobody knows because you can't see inside. You need a special you need special access to get in there. And then this one just it was just demolished, and they've been demolishing a lot of buildings this past couple of years. They've been kind of, but my theory is they let them run into ruin. So they let them go derelict, and then they have the excuse that they're going to have to fix it. They're going to have to, modernize it, bring it up to standards, even though what was there was probably better than what we have now.
Right.
It just gives them the opportunity to get rid of the old technology.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. It's interesting. I posted a video on my Instagram and my social media stuff, and I was talking about how the World Fair stuff, and to the obviously the Olympics just ended, and I mentioned that during the Olympics they built infrastructure for these Olympics, and we're told that's sort of like what they did back in the day with the World Fairs or the centennial celebrations, and they built like hundreds of buildings, like literally hundreds for these things. I think like in San Francisco and also Chicago, supposedly they built 200 buildings.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, but they're saying that they did that and they were temporary structures. And I have somebody repeating like the normie takes, and they're saying, oh, those buildings were only made of paper mache and wire and blah, 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 and all this. And again, so I've got a construction background. I'm like, so what we're told is millions of people visited these cities and they went into these buildings. And then somebody was saying, oh, well, those things would never pass code now. And the thing is funny about it is like the old world didn't need codes like we did, or if they likely had them, because those buildings do not come down on their own volition. It's like they come down when there's fires in cities, or obviously they get demolished in wars, but those buildings last forever when they let them. Yeah. So it's not about code. And yeah, the idea that those buildings were temporary,
I know.
Again, like the dumbest part about it is people are saying, oh, they're only made of like wood and plaster and all that. And I'm like, well, what do you think buildings are made of now? They're literally making they're making skyscrapers out of wood now. So the idea of temporary is really only temporary if you decide to destroy it later. Any building's temporary if you want to demo it tomorrow. Yeah. But no, if you would have left them up, they would have stayed up. And for one, it's a straight up lie, because the weight of those buildings, the size of them, they had steel frames. So even if they were made of plaster, they had to have structural integrity to not fall down. And if you didn't have you'd have millions of people going in and out of them. It's like, you think they're going to put that thing up? Yeah. Like, I mean, come on. It's not a movie set. Don't even start with that stuff. Like I said, these people you're repeating things you've heard. And then when you see close up images of those buildings, they have age. They look like old buildings. And I just read John Levi's book about evidence of the old world, and he goes in depth about San Francisco. And there was evidence that the famous, I guess, the midwinter fair in San Francisco was 1894. Well, there's an advertisement for the 93 one in one of these old papers in San Francisco. So they actually kind of we got them situation where that might have been a yearly thing they did, which makes sense. Is you have this certain fair every year in this glorious town that's been here forever, and that's one way to celebrate all these old buildings. But I think that in many cases those buildings were destroyed afterwards. And what's interesting about what he mentions about the San Francisco one specifically is supposedly the budget, all the kind of things, and then the fact that electricity was very new back then, but they lit this whole place up.
I know. And
they were saying like the amount of like how the resources, like based on what we're told how they would have done it, it's really good. I mean, like I would say that John Levi, his videos are great. This is way more technical. Like they really did all the research and like calculated all the costs and what they speculated how long it would have took to do things. And I was pretty blown away about like the logistics of powering these things, the amount of wire that had to be laid to all these different buildings. And literally there's pictures of things that look like they might have been like kind of like the battery looking things. Actually, I think I got a picture of this to share to kind of show. I'm not sure if I don't think this is from the World Fair, but let me show it my Pinterest. something that looked like a prop could possibly be a temporary like that.
Okay. Right.
Like, what is that? I mean, come on. Like, you know that's obviously has to do with electricity. That I don't know how old that picture is. I'm not even sure where it's from. But
Yeah.
stuff like that, these things, these world fairs were lit up. And we're told based on what we've been taught is that electricity was like brand new. You literally have Edison and some guy going out there, Tesla and some other dude, and they're like just laying out wire after wire. They literally just invented this stuff.
I know.
And they're powering these brand new cities and they're lighting them up.
Well, even in San Francisco, that big building, I can't remember, was it something jewels, but it was covered in jewels. I don't know if you've seen that, but somebody added color to it because obviously there was only black and white available, but apparently in the day it talked about, at the time, it would have actually had all these different color jewels in front of the lights. So it wouldn't have just been bright light, but it would have been colorful.
I spelled San Francisco wrong because they're not showing me the mid.
Was it like 1910 or something like that?
I think it was 18. Oh yeah, there was one in 1900. I think there was.
If you go down a little bit, I think
there's looks like something similar to that.
I saw something there.
I think some of them look like they're the one in Chicago.
There, right in the middle. No, is that
the middle? Oh yeah. Here you go. Yeah, that's it. The Tower of Jewels at night.
Yeah. So and it looks even strobed. Like it's not just lights shining; it's like strobing.
Yeah. No, I mean again, like these are these places. This is San Francisco, I think too.
That's a really nice temporary structure.
I mean, can you even imagine that they built all these buildings for this fair and they lit it up like this?
Yeah.
Come on now.
I mean, even a temporary structure, I don't think you could build like that in a quick time. You'd still have to make it look like that, which would take an awful lot of time. I can't remember who said it, but they said, even if I was doing that with cake decoration, it would take me years to do.
Oh yeah, I mean the thing about it is, and I think that the one thing that people notice when they actually look into the old world buildings like closely, is they have a similar style, but they're all unique. Like the details on these buildings, and so, like again, my company has done lots of things with plaster, and so yeah, certain plasters you can make molds for them, but you have to make different molds for all the little designs, and also. The thing is, like when people say, "Oh, it's only made of plaster," and I think in their head they think they think of paper mache or something. But plaster back in those days, it was not synthetic, so it would have been made of concrete. It would have made literally would have made of cement, like cement and lime and sand and all the things. So it would have been very heavy. So it's not easy. It's like I've heard that same argument made about like the pyramids. They were saying that those blocks were actually not stone; they made them out of they were wet cement at some point. And I'm like, it still weighs the same. I mean, I've done this kind of work where I actually had to mix cement in a mixer and then mix the plaster together and then hoist it up on buckets where they're like doing stucco on these buildings.
Yep.
That's a lot of, like you can only imagine like how much work that is. And then this is a primitive time. And again, like a place like San Francisco is supposedly new. The resources are not so great around there because it's not in the East Coast. The math does not math. The timeline does not make sense. And when you see them lighting up like this is supposedly right around the time where I think there was a big downturn in the market. Like the economy just crashed right around the time they did the 1894 World Midwinter Fair in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so the resources it would take to light this place up, to staff it and all the things, it only makes sense if it was cheaper to do it and easier to light a place up like that.
Yeah.
And if what we're saying about being able to harness like electrostatic energy, maybe magnetism using the ether with the Antiquitech, the antennas, the domes, all the things. It doesn't seem feasible because this is a time where it would have been much harder for people to travel as well.
Yeah.
You know, so if you couldn't, if it was harder to travel, why would people be going to these places? You think about it, like, it's almost like that people forget that people were just not continually on vacation back in those days. Where did they even have hotels to house the people? Where were they staying at? You know, the restrooms, we're told like they didn't have like the indoor plumbing and all that stuff. They didn't have porta johns back in those days. What were they doing?
Yeah.
It's like I said,
I mean, I think personally they had a much more free way of life because obviously what we think is the narrative or what we've been taught is the narrative wasn't the narrative. So what was it? Well, I think they actually traveled around really freely. I think they had the flying airships. I think they were able to get around fairly easily, even on the trains.
Right.
The trains were very well laid back then. They had probably very low cost to them. It was very luxurious.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you're kind of. I mean, I think I agree that like that actually makes sense to the narrative. I mean, or not to the narrative, but like more, it makes sense of like how it was the things they did were possible.
Yeah.
Back in those days. I mean, just look at this stuff.
I know.
It's just like it's unreal. I mean, this stuff obviously, if what we're taught is true, these people had never seen anything like this. But even today in 2024, I'm staring at that stuff and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be impressed by electrified buildings like that, but yet here we are.
Yeah. I mean, the world has been thrown into darkness when you think of it that way.
Yeah. And then, but I think I said it actually makes sense to the narrative as well that you could have free travel, like, right. Yeah. Easy travel. You'd have millions of people going to visit these cities. Maybe that part was true.
Yeah.
But these days we can't do that because we have to go sit in a cubicle all week. We have to save our money to go to a place where we sit on a beach, hopefully, or something like that. Like do something that's like really relaxed because we can't go see stuff like this. And obviously, you know, and to obviously again, to not that I need to address the haters anymore, but like when you see inside of these buildings, there's pictures from inside too. So these things are not movie sets. These are real buildings.
Yeah.
And you can see steel frames. I think somebody made a good point is like that. So it was interesting. What I found interesting in John Levi's book, he mentions, so there's the centennial celebration in Philadelphia in 1876. So it was like the 100 years of the country. And so they made a building that was 22 acres big in the inside. And it was the biggest building in the whole world at the time.
Mm-hmm.
What did they do? They tore it down.
Yeah.
And then so in 1893, they had the Columbia exhibition in Chicago. And they made a building that was I think it was 44 acres, I think, inside. 44 acres inside. So it was twice as big. And it was also the biggest building in the world. And they tore that one down. And so I've heard a theory, and it makes sense. If you look at some of these buildings, they almost look like hangars because they're so big and tall. And it's like, is it possible that that's what they were? Were these airship hangars?
Yeah.
I think actually it kind of makes sense because it actually makes sense to how people would have got there.
Yep. I would agree. And a lot of those airships were repowering or refueling their gas at the top of the building. So I've seen that where the Empire State Building was actually a refueling point for the airships. And I just find all of that really fascinating. And that the airships were harnessing that ether kind of electrostatic atmospheric energy.
That's what I was sharing this picture. This is a recreation, I guess, of like the 1922 contest to create the Chicago Tribune headquarters. So I guess a modern artist, I guess I got that part wrong. A modern artist put the buildings together, but I think the interesting part about it is it's showing all the airships all around, and it's showing the airships with the mooring stations and all the docking stations at the tops of these buildings. Yeah, you think about like if that's how you traveled, because even you think about like traveling now sucks. Like going to the airport is not fun. So because then you have to go, you have to get your bags, then you have to go get a car, and then you have to go to where you're going to go. But what if you wanted to go visit Chicago and you took the airship, you took it right to the hotel you were at, and you docked right there, and you walked right in, and you were right there. And it's like, that makes a lot more sense because you don't need this giant runway. You could put more people in these things. It literally, it's like a cruise ship that floats.
Yep.
An elegant way to travel.
I think so. And one of my videos covers kind of that old world technology from a book that was written and illustrated back in the 1800s. And it shows these things flying around, even individual ones, like you would have like a water jet ski, but instead of being on the water, they're actually in the air. So you could actually fly them as an individual little kind of get around, almost like a little motorbike, but in the air. And I think all of this existed. I do. But the one thing that kind of came together for me was, those iron balconies that the old world buildings have, like the old hotels and stuff. I think they used that to like hook onto. So they'd like, you might catch a cab. They called them aero cabs. And you could catch your little cab to your door, and it would just like hook on somehow, probably have a pair of steps just come out, and you'd walk straight into your room. Because if you go into the old buildings of that time, the stairways, I don't know if you've been to Europe, but the stairways are so tiny. Like you would never be able to haul bags or furniture up there. They're so tight and winding. And if you're up more than one floor, you'd literally die. Especially because they had those big dresses and, a lot of paraphernalia. And I just think they would go straight into their balcony. They would go straight into their room from right on their balcony. So that's kind of I do think that was the elegant side of the Antiquitech era. And I think they had all that stuff when the millennial reign was going on. So I do think the fact that this was all available free. It was just a standard way of life. There was none of this like being stuck in traffic, being grounded to the road and all that. You could actually just lift up into the air and go. And they weren't like moving super fast. I think those airships were kind of floating in a sense. They were quiet, they were clean. They didn't have any dangerous emissions. So, anyway, that's a whole interesting angle on it. But I think the one thing I just wanted to go back to really quickly, I'll just share my screen again.
Okay, sure.
Hang on. So what I really love is how we can see kind of, I think what they're trying to harness is this in the sky. I think that's kind of a representation of the ether. And as a lot of us have talked about the millennial reign in the millennial reign community is that, or in the little season community, is that it's possible that this is a representation of the Ezekiel passages that talk about the colors, the emerald under God's throne and those rainbow colors as well. And I think this is actually part of the whole structure, right? So the excitation of the atmosphere creates color at that point because closest to God, probably that highest frequency like he used when he created the earth and all the things in it. So I think it just reflects the glory of God the closer you get to him. And so I kind of think about the atmospheric energy as a representative, sort of like that says the whole earth is full of his glory. So when we talk about transferring that energy into light and into heat for our homes or whatever it might be, I think we are drawing down the energy that essentially just comes from God. Like, I think it's in everything, and it's, God is in all things, and his creative life energy. So these are kind of the more complex structures that I would say we're harnessing that energy. They've been, I don't know if you've heard of steeplejacks. They're quite famous. You probably have because you're in the building industry, but for people listening, they talk about them repairing the steeples, over the last few hundred years. And I think what they've been doing is they've been actually removing the elements or the components that actually make them work, right? So that's been an ongoing thing. You'll see steeplejacks on these, standing way up high, looking kind of dangerous there. But yeah, so essentially these little antennas at the top or weather vanes would be just slightly moving, and then the components underneath them would be sort of activating things like mercury and things like that. I know AWAR does a whole alchemical approach to that. But I do find that people that are not Christians, that don't have the worldview that we have, they often will try and say the same things, but just leave God out of it, where I think you can't have this conversation without God in it, because
No.
I think that energy is that connection between us and God. So when we'd go into a cathedral, for example, and you'd have the bells ringing and you'd have the harmonic frequencies of all the, whether it be the organ or the choral, you would have this stimulation of the atmosphere. You would have this kind of resonant frequency going up into the air. And you would kind of have it, and this is just a diagram. I don't like how they word this here. They call it universal force because they don't want to acknowledge God, right? But essentially, I think it's just the dynamic here that the church would be producing resonant frequency. It would be going up into the atmosphere, and it would actually be stimulating or exciting the atmosphere, which would then cause a charge to come into the mechanisms and the steeples like that. So the antennas would actually connect to those electric or etheric energies.
Yeah, it's one of those things too when you think about it that, so when you see a modern church being built, typically they're these metal buildings now. They're basically, obviously, everything they build now is just the cheapest way you could build a building. But it's funny just seeing like old churches and they just have these steeples on them. And I know not all of them are in Tequitech or anything like that, but at some point they just decided to build churches with these very tall towers and antennas and crosses on top of them. And you just look at them now and I'm just, I guess it's like I said, sometimes you wake up in a world and it's just established in the way it is. And you don't really think about it until later. And until they say, hey, they don't really build them like they used to. Right. They took a lot of time to build these churches. And isn't it kind of funny when you go to, so again, it's not a big city, but like the most established downtown where I live is in Norfolk, Virginia. And I did a little bit of boots on the ground there. And you look at how many churches are in a very small vicinity. There's literally one on every block.
Yeah.
Okay. Just think about when they built these things. What they say the population was. Did they really need that many churches? Did they, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like was it because these buildings were, the idea of cathedral or cathode, like, were these things built to be more than a house where you went in to praise God? Did this have something to do with the energy grid? And I think it makes sense that it does, but I'm not saying they couldn't do two things at one time, but it is interesting that there's so many churches in these places, so many of them that, again, like when they build normal areas, and again, you could say that people are just getting further away from God, but and that's a good argument too. I'm not going to say that's not a good argument, but at the same time, during the very early foundings of these cities, there's churches built on every block in every one of these places. When you think that like people would say, hey, we got to build everything else. We'll build something, like everybody will go, we'll just build a big church.
Yeah.
But they don't. There's churches on every block.
Yeah. Well, something that I really like, my sort of the way that I see it is that they were for praising God, as all things are, right? So everything is a way to glorify God. And it says, if we don't praise God, the rocks will cry out. So,
right.
I think that speaks to the fact that everything God has created has a purpose, but it also works in harmony with everything else he made. So whether it be a beautiful structure or a very basic structure, everything has a functional purpose. And the way that I've sort of spoken about this in the past, and I think the Fringy, Kristen and Rick on That's So Fringy, we've had that discussion about how these buildings were most likely centers for healing. So if you think about the millennial reign, and these were places maybe you could go, because we know it wasn't perfect during the millennial reign, but if you came here and you went into the baptismal tank and I don't know, all these frequencies and God's, that etheric sort of energy was being poured into this place, it might be somewhere that you could just go and get healed. And you kind of see that reflected in other stories that have come out of that period, like that place in Lourdes, France, for example. So people have this, this connection between certain locations, and I do think, probably built on geothermic springs or something like that, but also probably on those lines, those energy lines on the earth as well. I think they've proven that a lot of these churches were built, like I think you were commenting on that. So there's a connection, and it's not so much that God comes into the building, but it's that I just really look forward to what things will be like when God, straightens everything out again.
Well, what's interesting is you think about it too. It's like that, like you were saying, if like this is God's essence being put in there and it's like energy, you imagine if, you're doing more than one thing at a time. And it really sounds interesting when you think about like the idea of the acoustics, the sound, the vibrations. Again, this is not new agey because God spoke things into existence.
Yeah.
It's interesting idea that if they had the knowledge of it, and it literally came from God, like it came from the saints, it came from Jesus himself on more how this place worked. You go in there and you sing praise songs to God, and you're literally powering some of the things in your town because of the sound and all the things, and or you're just giving glory to God because of all the things he's given you. And like, so you're literally going in there and you got your free energy too, and you got your healing.
Yeah.
It makes sense because obviously then you're grateful. You go to this place and you're grateful for it. Exactly. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. It makes sense to me though.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And the fact that we can see that the patents that now exist, the sort of background is what we've been looking at, really to show that, there is a way to draw down this energy. And it looks like, by all accounts, these antennas that were on the churches, on the cathedrals, were made to do that. And one more point, I get a little bit distressed going to churches where everything is just in a big black box, because I think, and even being like the sound is coming through an electrical cord, because they think there's something really natural and beautiful and purposeful within this sort of cathedral system that was made to resonate at a perfect frequency. We know they've changed the frequencies of music, right? To kind of be more of a weapon against us,
right,
to cause chaos and to cause mental illness and to break us down, where I believe that the resonant frequencies and harmonic frequencies that you would have experienced in a cathedral would have actually been more conducive to right thinking and good health and peace of mind and all of those things that God wants us to have. So there's all of that as well. And I think that really was something that they had to almost break. And so they took away all the bells, they melted them into metal, and then made machinery for war with them, which is just like crazy. But that is what the devil does, right?
Right.
He takes a good thing and he corrupts it. And that's just another point I want to make, is I see people say, well, how could you have all these amazing buildings with weird statues on them? Well, the statues that were added later could have just definitely been added by the occultists that took over a period of time. Like, I think that the structures themselves speak to me of a natural designer, which would be God. I don't see Satan creating anything beautiful. I don't see the enemy kind of designing things that are going to make you healthy of mind and soul and body. So that's just a big problem I have with that whole argument. I think it's very likely that anything that was added later could have been, from another group of people.
Yeah, for sure. That's been an argument. It's funny. I made that when I first was resistant to this idea that the buildings were evidence of the millennial reign. I was saying, well, what about all the paganism and the gargoyles and the weird stuff on them? And at the same time, I think people get some of this stuff just twisted on, like, or they have an imagination, not imagination, but they have an idea in their mind of what the millennial reign was supposed to be like before they've ever, been presented with this topic. So they'll say, oh, well, everything was supposed to be perfect during the millennial reign. It's like, it doesn't say that. Like, like the Bible does not say that. And so they take certain verses and they say, well, this had to be the millennial reign. And it's this perfect time. And I think a lot of those are visions of heaven, or maybe that might be talking about New Jerusalem, what that's like. And it's not like the rest of the earth. And so obviously at some point, biblically, if Satan can deceive the nations at the end. No, it wasn't a perfect time. Like the earth was not perfect because the nations could be deceived later. If they were perfect, then it wouldn't be possible. So it makes obviously it makes sense in the overall story of the Bible, God's creation, that there's still a choice during the millennial reign. Not everybody. I mean, it says that God rules the nations, or Jesus rules the nations with a rod of iron. So he doesn't need to do that if everyone's good, right?
Exactly.
So I mean, yeah. So obviously there's still room for rebellion, and it sounds like that there was.
Yeah.
So yeah, and at the same time, our idea of history, it's like, how much do we really even know about it? Because let's just say we believe, let's just go, to not, for the point being is that, let's just say Satan was loose in 1776. Well, that's a lot of time to be able to add things to buildings. And if there was still knowledge of things, of how to do certain things, knowledge that was used for good could be used for evil too.
Yeah, and I think they inherited so much. Like, they hid it, but they inherited it. So, like, just going back to Tesla for a minute, I think these people needed their own heroes to just plant along the way.
Right.
And they would just give them this technology and say, okay, go write some stuff about it and make sure, you're covering our bases so that we can release it at a certain time. And obviously, like, why else would Elon Musk use the name Tesla? They're trying to draw attention to this, right? They're trying to get people to understand, like, just follow them down the garden path, right? But as for those gargoyle things, like, some of them are pretty disgusting. And I, on a completely different program, which wasn't anything to do with the millennial reign, it wasn't anything to do with even really the architecture, but it was just kind of like this guy who goes around and he re-puts them back on because they fall off really easy.
Interesting.
Yeah, like if there's a tremor, some kind of earthquake, a lot of them fall off. So that just tells me maybe they weren't there originally. So just something to think about. Yeah.
Well, let's just speculate wildly in this, and don't quote me on this to say I'm saying this is true. We don't really know what certain beings that God created look like. It is interesting what they say gargoyles are used for, which, like I said, if you buy this, I don't really buy it. But the idea that they're supposed to keep evil spirits out of buildings, like, they look pretty evil, but I mean, at the same time, like, there's certain animals and stuff that look pretty scary and evil. If you didn't know what they were, God created them too. So what if there were beings that God created that looked like that actually did have some kind of duty on earth? If you think about it, even God tells Job that he created the Leviathan and how terrifying it is, and the behemoth and all that stuff. So maybe those are representations of things that he created. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm just like, again, we're just talking here, but the point, like I said, the point is, like, we really don't know a lot about heavenly creatures, what they really look like. Do they look more like men? I actually believe, like, the stuff in Ezekiel about how angels are described, I really don't. I think that's more a vision of, like, the zodiac, the stars, and the representation of the things, like the wheels inside the wheels. I think I know Michael Heiser talked about the lights, or the eyes, are actually translated as stars and other things, where it's like these are visions of bigger things than. It's not. I don't think it's a being with a bunch of eyeballs. Like, I really don't think. I don't think that's like a literal thing, but. That being said, it's like, I think that there's a lot we don't know about. Were they added later, or were they originally there?
Yeah, it's really hard to know, and we can only speculate, as you say. But I wanted to just talk quickly about the G again, because when we're talking about ether energy and all of this stuff, I came across a very interesting article that talks about ether. The ether field was, and this is by scientists. So these are people that are writing about it. They call it the G field. And so I wonder as well if there's a possible use for referencing ether as with a G. And the reason I say that is because we see this G cropping up in a lot of places, not just in the Masonic, But just really quickly to give you a little bit of dictionaries. So I have really old dictionaries here, so I like to look up these words because they don't exist in newer dictionaries, basically. But what ether is described as is the upper air, sky, firmament. So they use the word firmament for this. And then they use it as a liquid. So liquidium. So it's actually related to the air that's up in the firmament. And then I have another one here.
Look what it says right there. You go back to that real quick. It said person, heaven, i.e. Jupiter.
Right.
That's kind of interesting. Obviously, biblically, you would say, or like historically, mythology, and including the Bible, Jupiter is Zeus.
Right.
And he's associated with obviously lightning energy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think as well, it's related to, so we'll get into it a little bit more, but heavenly, ethereal is a word that you use for something
Ethereal,
that's kind of like light and airy and celestial. So those are common terms, and they actually come from this. And so we see upper regions of space, rarefied element that fills them, right? And then they kind of have the chemical as well that's called ether, and then all this. And then pertaining to or characteristic of ether, so the upper regions, celestial, spirit-like, airy, tenuous, implying delicacy or spirituality. And that's just something I want to move forward with a little bit on this, because when we look at the classical elements, the table, sorry about this diagram, but this is exactly what I think is happening with the elites. I think they are practicing spells on us, and I think they're using all of the elements to trap us, if you will. So the one at the top there, if you look at the original word of it, it's actually called ether.
Interesting.
And I think they are practicing elemental magic. And the reason I say that is because I don't know if you're aware or if you knew what they kind of describe as the fourth industrial revolution. So
what you mean, like the AI?
Wow. Right. So what I think they have their cover stories like they always do. But if you think of the way that they've taken over the industries of the world, they've captured certain things. And you mentioned earlier how they just took ownership of the land. So these robber barons came in, they took ownership of the land, they put their mark on everything, they patented everything. But that would be Earth, right? So the Earth is something they took control of right away. Because then once you own the Earth, you can do everything on the Earth. You can sell it. You can, remanufacture whatever has to do with it, right? And then they took control of water, so that the water supply is totally under their control. Even the rainwater, we can't collect rainwater, right? And then they took control of electricity, so that atmospheric electricity. And now they're taking control. So the fourth industrial revolution is about climate, and they're taking control of the air. So they're literally going to start charging on our carbon footprint, right? So that's going to be a whole new industrial grab of money for them. So they need new profits. So they've created this like air industry that supposedly we're somehow going to be responsible for like the air we breathe, right? And then I think the one that is ether is actually related to that G field I was talking about. And what do we have? We have 5G and 6G towers.
Right.
So they're harnessing the frequency in the air, the energy in the air. So we're talking about this now. And they're using, like what you said, like HARP. They're using ionosphere. They're hacking the ether energies of the air to start manipulating all of that. And I will say that I believe that ether is actually how they transfer, because it's actually, if you read Isaac Newton and things like that, you can transfer messages through the ether. So little packets of data actually get transferred through the ether, which is why you have Ethernet, right?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, it's funny. I never even thought about that.
Yeah. So all of this is connected. And I think they are practicing what I would say is geomancy or something like that. Some kind of, they're using the square and compass to capture all of the elements that we rely on to live, because these are all the classical elements of the universe in which we live. And they're using them against us to really manipulate, control, make us submissive to them. And as you said, like, it could be the fact that they release free energy to us, but there's going to be a huge cost to us in one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I kind of like, I kind of pinned that one down a while back, but it was because they have actually shown what they're all about through their cults, right?
Oh yeah, the magic pentagram.
Yeah. And I think this is how the Pythagorean sort of cults that they belong to are the ones that that they're using to kind of manipulate and control the world around them for their own profit, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. See, yeah, it seems like that's what the goal is. Yeah, to monetize everything. And again, it's interesting when you think about just what Jesus said. He said that you cannot serve both God and money.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like those are the two masters he kind of gave you. And it's like, so if there was a time of peace and for 1,000 years and prosperity, it was a time where people didn't have to worry about money like they do now.
Yeah.
And then, like, you imagine how much people would be different if they were not always so concerned about money.
Yeah.
And so now they monetize everything. And yeah, it's obviously, you know, I kept on thinking about when you're showing, especially those, the 4 elements, and then you have the ether, the 5th element. So there's the movie, The Fifth Element. I know we talked about that once on the last time we were together. And then that stupid Frozen 2 movie was all about them becoming the 5th element, Elsa and Anna. And so Elsa's some witch, basically, so some ice witch. And they together were the 5th element, where it's almost like, yeah, are they trying to say that, you know, so in the 5th element, you literally had some kind of god that was reborn as a woman. And again, it's like some representation of like the devil coming back as like Venus or something like that. And then in Frozen, yeah, you have somebody can manipulate the spirits or something like that. And that's the 5th element, the ethereal plane. Yeah. Being able to operate on the ethereal plane.
Yep. And I actually have some pictures here of the 5th element from that movie. So let me just share that. So the one thing that they do, I don't know if you remember, but like she has this tattoo on her arm and it's got the 5 elements. And so that gives him like this, you know, the priest or whatever. He's like, oh, she's the supreme being. And then at the end of it, they go into this pyramid and they start activating these. But the one that makes, I guess, the whole power system work, I guess they're like fighting for survival against this incoming alien race, is the 5th element. So this is why I say I think they are harnessing all 5 of the elements just like this. I think this is their occult mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then basically if you just flip it on its head, obviously they're the ones that want to keep the aliens out. But what if the aliens in the little season, what if the aliens are actually Jesus and the saints or something like that, right? Like,
right.
So,
yeah, that would be quite the plot twist. You know, it's interesting too. Another movie reference is, I think the second Thor movie is all about, I don't know if you saw that. It was called the Dark World, and it was all about the ether.
Right.
And it was like, yeah, this, but it was like this dark element that was coming into the earth. And it was obviously whoever could manipulate the ether had control over all the realms.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it makes sense. Obviously, if you could control, if what we're saying is true and there's this energy that can be tapped into, obviously that would make somebody here, you know, a god, right?
Right. Yeah. And even just the fact that they've used a lot of these energies to tear down the world that was here, right? So can you see this electrical experimenter? Okay.
Tesla the Destroyer. Interesting.
Right? So check this out. This is actually a magazine called The Electrical Experimenter, Popular Electrical News. It's called the Tesla Destroyer, and it's this oscillation machine. And in my view, it is the direct weapon. I don't want
Oh,
to say
the do.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then, so that's from 1916. They were building weapons back then, these kind of weapons, and they probably had them way before that.
Well, you know what's interesting is people talk about that, and I've seen people show pictures. I know that this was going around the Tataria Millennial Reign of Christ thing, and somebody was showing a picture, and I can't remember if that was in England. It was some kind of old structure that supposedly got destroyed during World War I. And you're kind of like saying, what could have done? Like, what would have done that to a town back in those days? I'm not saying they didn't have, like mortars and stuff that was powerful, but I mean, like when you see what this place looked like, it looked worse than Hiroshima.
Right.
So either the picture's fake, or did they have something else? Which, I mean, to me, it's likely. I think it's more likely that maybe the picture was real, or maybe it wasn't real. Maybe they were just trying to say that they could rebuild buildings like this again. But the way the place looked, fire didn't do that.
No,
Cannonballs didn't do that. It was something really heavy.
Yeah, and it actually kind of explains here. So this is charged by a suitable high frequency, high voltage apparatus, and a current is discharged into the earth periodically and in the form of high frequency alternating wave. The electric wave is then supposed to travel through the earth along its surface shell, and in turn to manifest its presence at any point where there might be erected a similar high capacity tower to that above. So they talk actually about this being very destructive on like the earth crust, basically. So if you wanted to create an earthquake, if you wanted to completely destroy a city, this would be a good machine to use for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. But it's quite an interesting article. I can send it to you to link if you want.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I'm sure some people might be interested in reading that.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously just so much more to this. And I was just thinking about that. Yeah, so interesting, the idea that if direct energy weapons had something to do with tapping into the energy that's in the sky. And yeah, like if you could harness that. I mean, you even think about it just like almost like as a kid, just taking a magnifying glass and being able to set fires with it. Being able to just harness the sun in that kind of way where, you can do all kinds of damage with just a mirror, or I mean, just glass.
Yeah.
So what could they do? Like, what could they do with the idea of harnessing powerful things? That's what I said. I've wondered that too about some of the megaliths and things. And yeah, I don't know how people would decimate like pyramids and stuff without really powerful things.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's a good example of this in Egypt of a, like what people would say is it looked like it was bombed, like a modern bomb destroyed some pyramid then. Because you're thinking about, like, if you look at the Great Pyramid, even regular bombs, I don't know what they're going to do to a structure that dense and that huge, but something destroyed one. So you could think about how powerful that must have been. And yeah, I mean, I that's what I've been saying now, because if you really think about it, if somebody has the ability to manipulate stone in the way they did, that means they could cut things. They're very hard stones. They had tools that could do that. Well, if they could cut stones like that, they had weapons that could cut other things. They had all kinds, like, I think that's the thing, is like that with a lot of people, including myself, when I first started watching shows like Ancient Aliens, I was like, well, obviously I don't believe they did that with copper tools. So the evidence is that they had technology was the buildings. So how did they do it? I don't know. I don't believe it was aliens, but the point is, I know that they had something. The evidence is the buildings. So they had something, so like you don't try to put your square peg through that round hole and say, oh, well, this is the tools we know they had, so therefore they did it with it. No. There's a missing component. They had something. Yeah. In the same way, in the early 1900s, they had ability to make buildings. They had the ability to create. They had the equal ability to destroy.
Yep.
At least.
Yeah, and I mean, if you actually read back in some of the very old science texts, like Sir Isaac Newton would be a good one, because he talked a lot about ether, and he talked about it like a liquid, like a plasma, but it's in the air. So it acts as that go-between. It's like it holds everything together. But it's extremely powerful, right? So it's like a delivery system. So if you are, like the electrical atmospheric energy uses ether to get from one point to the other. It's kind of like that 0-point energy concept. But it's actually, it's highly connective. It's, and they were able to capture it. So I've read experiments where people are actually capturing ether and manipulating it, like doing experiments with it. So it exists. I think that's one thing we have to just put a nail in and say, it definitely exists. Why don't we know about it? Why don't we know anything? Why don't we learn these things in school? Is a big question. Like, why are we learning garbage physics? Why are we learning, all this ridiculous math? Well, it's actually so that we don't really understand anything. That's the top and bottom of it. Because I don't think God created a world for us that we couldn't understand.
I 100% agree. I've often questioned like the things that we have ingrained in our brains that like, why do we need to know this thing? I would say a couple examples of this would be like, what is it? The Hindenburg. Like, why should we care about some kind of Zeppelin caught fire years ago? The Zeppelin, so you have that one, you have obviously the Titanic, you have like Pompeii. Like, why do we need to know so much about a city that was destroyed by a volcano so many years ago? E equals MC square. Like, like that's like a thing that like, why do I remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know what that even means. Like, as a theory of relativity or something like that. But the point is like that we're taught about that. So it's like, it's almost like, is that kind of stuff put out there as, they're trying to wag the dog here by putting this certain information out there the way they want you to, have like little things to hang other lies upon. And I think that makes sense because otherwise the things that we do learn in history class seem very random when you actually think about it. And then when you research history on your own, okay, so now I'm actually getting the understanding of why things were done, not just dates and places and people that you'll forget immediately. Yeah. It's like why people, the motivations they had and like, what did that begot, who benefited, who suffered during this time. And I do think that's a good example of like, why they don't teach us that stuff because it matters. I think that again, like the electrostatic stuff, I think that matters. Electromagnetism, if that could possibly be it too, is like that. I do think it's interesting. Like when you go back to what you're saying, it's like, I remember as a kid in the 80s, I watched the Back to the Future movies, and then like Back to the Future 2 was supposed to be like this awesome future. Hoverboards. We have not got to the hoverboards. We're past the future in Back to the Future.
Yeah.
It's what a slap in the face that people have those things that roll around that catch fire. You know what I'm saying? Like the 2-wheeled things, and they call those hoverboards.
Yeah.
Those are not hoverboards. The hoverboards were floating skateboards.
Yeah.
But they were shown floating cars and all that kind of stuff. And it was funny to even think about, like you're talking about, that the idea of like airship travel and maybe personal airships, where like that would have been more like flying cars. Can you imagine? It's like that really is. And it's like, it makes sense in the irony that we're looking for a future with flying cars and all this, just like a Star Wars environment. Meanwhile, the Jetsons, as somebody mentioned. Meanwhile, they literally had flying vehicles for personal use. There was access to that. It just, is that possible? I think it is. It makes sense.
I think a few things like, okay, so the education is actually made to make kids almost feel stupid. So there's a lot of kids who just don't get it because maybe they think more logically. I don't know. Mm-hmm. A lot of what we learn just isn't logical. It's very complex unnecessarily, I think, especially when you break down, there's easier ways of calculating things sometimes than what they teach you. They teach you
right. Well, like the new math, like people always talk about the new math, and you're like, as people are growing up, and they're like, how is this easier?
Yeah. And then you see someone like on Instagram, I don't know, doing the same calculation in like 2 steps, and you've had to do it in like this long, complicated calculation. Those kinds of things, right? But I also think that they've made us feel so small, like our area is so small. And again, to sort of going back to the population thing. So if the world is like growing exponentially, you know, like the populations are growing and you're getting smushed into smaller and smaller locations and houses. And then now they're talking about 15-minute cities, when actually the earth is big enough for everyone. God created it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And God has given us enough land, enough air, enough water, enough resources for everything. And that's the whole point, right? And that's why I think they're bringing us in this sort of system, the satanic system, which is intended to remove those things from us so that we are really left with nothing outside of just God. I mean, really, we have God, and that is that's where we rest our hope. But, you know, industrializing everything is kind of what they've done.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, it all goes together. Yeah, just monetizing things that used to be free at some point. Because you could think about it like that. That is how much land is in the United States that if like you had access to it, and you're like, who owns it?
Yeah.
You think like somebody like Bill Gates owning what, like more farmland than anybody in the whole world,
And
and then he's not farming it and all that kind of stuff, and you're thinking like how obscene that really is.
Yeah.
When like the people can't get loans anymore, they can't afford the loans to buy things, and like I said, even if you did, I saw some crazy story about some guy. I guess he had, lived in this town in probably like Kentucky, West Virginia, really poor place. But he was not using the city services. He was actually going to get his water a certain way. He was using different kinds of ways to heat his place. They eventually just took the house from him because he was not, like they were not going to let you do it on your own.
No.
And you're thinking like, who is this guy hurting? Obviously, the only thing it's hurting is the fact that people are looking and there's another way to do things, and it hurts the people ultimately to have the power to charge you money for everything. And if you say this guy's not even doing that, we can't have that. You can't have dissent in this kind of system.
Well, because they wrap everything up in bureaucracy and like policies and codes, like building codes, and if you don't comply with all that, then I'm sorry, but you can't build your house and you can't have that service or whatever it might be. But I think just like on a hopeful note, when we look at the old architecture, when we look at all that beautiful antiquitech and just the potential there for what life was like, I would say during the millennial reign, I think that it just gives us a lot of hope for when this little season of Satan is over and we are with the Lord and we're with our brothers and sisters in Christ, and we're connected in an unhindered way to the power of God and to the glory of this creation that he's made. So I'm really excited. And I just think that that's a beautiful hope that we have, despite the little season in which we live.
No, I agree. I guess it's like there's a better way. We know there's a better way. I never asked you, so like so what's your thought process on how these structures were even created? Do you believe that like there was angels literally helped build them, the saints helped build them, or was this just knowledge passed on? I mean, how much do you believe there was interaction between Jesus himself and the people on earth during the millennial reign?
I think he was around because if you look at the old, like Eastern Orthodox iconography, it shows Jesus actually with people, right? So I think that's good evidence that he was here. Whether he went back and forth, I don't know, but like he definitely set up his kingdom through the church here on earth. And I think that the saints would have had special glorified power to do things. But whether they were building the buildings, I know that Goethe, I can't remember his first name, Wilhelm Goethe, maybe. He said that architecture is frozen water, something along those lines. So
interesting.
I think, and Rick off of that, so Frenji said the verse that Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. And so maybe the time between him ascending and him, returning was actually the time where he went and created all of those buildings. I think that's perfectly possible. And I think they speak so much to that frequency vibration creation process, like the cymatics, the windows and all of the way that they're almost like organic, but they're made of stone, but they're almost organic.
Right. No, I think that it's my belief. I think it was probably less hands-on than people make it sound. Cause I do think that like the kingdom of heaven was in heaven. I think that there was a place. And I think it's, to me, it makes sense that in the same way that the tabernacle, the temple, was representation of things that were in heaven, the things here were representation of probably things that were in New Jerusalem. Like maybe like it's a grander version of this. But I do think that it makes sense to me that, yeah, if cymatic patterns make like the windows for these cathedrals and different things, there was a way that they could manipulate stone and metal through sound. I mean, like that's the only way, because like I said, it makes sense to me that that's the only way they could really do it, to make perfect shapes and things. And I mean, I feel like that's the missing component, because I think that when people think about advanced technology, we think about what we have, but they had something different. And so like I think that missing component is the sound, it's the frequencies, the vibrations. God spoke things into existence. There was a way that they could use sound. Yeah, because I think I actually have, even like Paul from Understanding Conspiracy, I think he said that like, yeah, these buildings are like frozen sound.
Yep.
And I think it makes perfect sense to me that like that they were done a different way. They were not done with little hammers and chisels. They were done in a way that makes sense, that it's feasible to do it. It doesn't make sense that they're working on things that they never saw get finished getting built. They died, people died in their lifetimes, and it also doesn't make sense, unless this is true, that these buildings were built in a year. Maybe they were built in a year if they could use sound to do it, but
and I just wonder too,
otherwise.
If on the timeline, maybe between the cataclysm, the Armageddon sort of cataclysm that would have happened where the meltage happened, it's possible that at the end of that time, God also created other formations that happened, like in other areas of the earth. Like, so certain areas were being made desolate, but other areas were actually being grown, like, almost like organically grown at the same time. So I think that's all very possible. And then when you look at where some of these structures are like located, they're sometimes on the top of a cliff or like the top of a very
right.
I don't know. And it could be that they had the floating, like the airships could have been bringing materials in and whatever. But I just think it makes more sense for the scale of these cities as well, that they had to have been grown, especially the cathedrals.
Yeah, there's something. I mean, there's something missing, and I think it's just fun to kind of speculate about how it could happen. Yeah. To shift gears a little bit, as we've kind of talked about this topic a bit, I said it's funny. Me and you were going back and forth. And I'm sure I've talked about this a lot of times. I've the last 2 years I've gone from Genesis to Revelation. So I'm getting to the end of the Old Testament right now. I'm going a little slower this year. I'm trying to go a little bit slower. I'm still going pretty fast though. And I'm in the minor prophets, which again, it's almost offensive to say that certain prophets were minor.
Yeah.
But we were talking, I was saying, have you guys noticed that the books in the Bible are not in chronological order? I mean, I know it's not this is not some big conspiracy. Well, I'm not saying it's not a conspiracy. What I'm saying is that I'm not telling a lot of people things they don't know. But I'm saying like this is the first year that I've really noticed, and it feels like it's sticking out like a sore thumb. Just that, why am I reading about the stuff from Jeremiah, and then you go into Daniel, and Daniel's talking about the second temple, and then you're going into like Nehemiah and Ezra, and you're like, okay, so then they're talking about rebuilding the temple, and then you're going backwards before Isaiah, because then you have all these prophets prophesying about the destruction of Israel, because Israel was destroyed before Judah was in Jerusalem, so Assyria came calling to Israel and took them into captivity before Judah was taken into captivity. And I started to think about this. There's so many prophecies about the day of the Lord coming to Israel. And I know what people think. And I know, and I was probably one of these people. I thought this is an end times prophecy. But no, those were not end times prophecies. Those were prophecies about when Assyria was coming. And that happened. That had already happened biblically, like in the timeline you already read through. But it's confusing. What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was actually really good that you brought that up, because I do believe that whatever reason, who put these books in the order that they put them in, whether it was intentional or whether it was just to group them for some reason. I don't know. I haven't done that part of the research, but I know that with my family, it's really useful for us to read through them, not in the way they're laid out in the book, basically, to what you just said, like to read them so that you kind of jump back and forth a little bit, because it's weird. You're reading Second Kings and you're reading about, a certain king, and then you're reading about the prophet, but then you've lost trail of that because now you've moved into another book. And so you don't really follow the rest of what's happening or the prophecies that belong with that particular story.
Right. Yeah.
So it does help us really put that into better context. I was just looking for that image. Let me see if I can. Do you want me to share it? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I just sent it to myself. 1 second.
Yeah, because I was even reading today, and I was like thinking, like the way the Old Testament should end, I think it should be with, I think possibly with like Malachi and Zechariah, but like right before then, it should probably be. Or maybe it should be like Nehemiah and Ezra, then like Malachi. Like there's these books that should very clearly end. I mean, because it literally pretty much ends with they just rebuilt the second temple, and that's literally how it. And it's funny because I just feel like that again, like why Maccabees is not in the Bible.
Exactly.
Like that interim period where there's this what, like a 490-year gap, I think, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Yeah. It's strange. And I feel like it's almost like, I just can't help but think that like somebody doesn't want you to quite grasp it. So when they tell you, oh, these prophecies are for then, and this prophecy is for then, you're like, and they're quoting stuff that Truth Unedited did that exact same thing where I was like, now that I've read through the Bible enough times, I'm like, he's talking about the gathering together of Israel and Judah again. It's like, yeah, but that prophecy was from Isaiah or Jeremiah. And that happened with Cyrus the Great when they came back to Judah. And then, and guess what? And then the Messiah came. That happened. I mean, like, you shouldn't, that should not even be, that's undeniable if you're a Christian, because Jesus was the Messiah, unless you're saying he wasn't.
I know. And it's actually really dumbing down Christians. I mean, maybe at one point Christians had this all under their belt, right? But when we start relying on the church Sunday service to teach you, I mean, they don't even talk about prophets anymore. So it's kind of like a lost understanding. But yeah, this is just an example, I think, of what you were talking about.
That's good. I like that. I like this. This is interesting the way it's visually shown.
So here you go. 536 BC, Cyrus decreed that some should return and rebuild the temple, right? And that's when they went back. But at that same time, you've got Haggai, Zechariah, and then, but you're reading about these sort of after that, you've got Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. So they're kind of in order, but they're also kind of grouped outside of their order. Yeah, so there you have the temple completed, and then you have Nehemiah return, and the walls are completed there. But a lot of this is happening right before Jesus comes. So yeah, so there you go, like 400 years, and then the Roman Empire is from 63 BC. But yeah, this part, like even though I grew up in the church, it's embarrassing to say that I didn't realize a lot of this timeline.
Well, no, I think I feel like that for, if you guys didn't know this, the things we're saying right now, it took me a couple of reads through the Bible to understand. It's like, wait, because like I know how, I'm just like everybody else, where when you start reading through Chronicles and Kings, it's like it goes real quick, and you're like, man, I really need I need a big chart on my wall so I can start try to put these things together. But the more you read it, the more you understand. But the one thing, one thing I do is just like I got one of those study Bibles, and obviously I read the study notes sometimes, and I don't take them as the Word of God, but I like reading them sometimes. But the one thing I almost always do when I first start a book is say, when did they say this was written? And then you see some people date it between this, and the reason they do it is because there's these references to this. And so it's really easy to miss it, though, because like I think the one thing that people, it's so funny, like the layman often miss the fact that there's a split kingdom. There's Judah, and obviously it's a lot of times it's called just Jerusalem, but there's Judah, and then there's Israel. And so the layman's always thinking it's just Israel, but it's not Israel and Judah. Those are two different things. And that's why even we were talking about the other night about who are the Jews. And it's
Yeah.
like, so they're not just related to Judah, because the Jews weren't even named in the Bible until the book of Esther.
Yeah.
And so like what the Jews ended up being were people from Judea, but they were not necessarily from the line of Judah. They were people who came back after the captivity, and they all went to Judah.
Yeah.
You know, they were all back in the land. And so those ended up being called the Jews. And I'm not sure if all of them called themselves Jews or not. Point being was that Samaria was Israel. It was literally the capital of Israel. And they didn't get along with it. Like the apostles hated the people. I mean, like before Jesus, they didn't want to go to Samaria. They were like, God, like, why would we want them to repent? Those people are awful. And, you know, so it's like interesting the way that, and so now we're taught about 1948 and everybody in Israel is the Jews. And you're like, biblically, that was never even true.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, isn't it funny? Like you think just the understanding of what the Bible says is not Israel was never all the Jews. And that's why even Jesus is there when in Samaria, he's like, I'm here for the lost sheep of Israel. And that was part of what the Messiah was going to do, was going to bring them back into the fold.
Yeah.
And I think that this, what people really miss is that was a spiritual thing. That was literally, he was there bringing the kingdom to them, offering them the kingdom, and they had access to it. And the futurists are telling people that Jesus has not kept all his promises to the people of Israel. And I think that now I'm like, it's like offensive to me, because it's like, no, the kingdom does not come with observations within you. It's like, I'm offering you an eternal kingdom. And the futurists are agreeing. Well, the Israelites were right. The people in Israel were right to reject him, because he didn't offer. He didn't do all the things he was promising. God was going to promise them he was going to do.
Yeah. And it's setting up a false. So this is the whole reason why futurism has been seeded into the church, right? It's for the final deception, I believe, is that basically not only the church is expecting a return of Christ, but the occultists are leading them right to their Christ, because their Christ is also expected to come onto the scene. And so we have a futurist alignment there between those who are deceived and the deceivers. And that's going to actually play out over the next few years, I believe. But yeah, I mean, how better to hide what happened than to just jumble it all up into different books and put it all kind of in an incoherent, like, chronological, like, context, and then you don't even understand what's going on. I just keep saying to people that are, you know, I'm talking to in my personal life, I'm like, read the prophets,
Right.
Go back, read the prophets, because they tell you everything that happened. You know, it all happened. All that stuff that you are quoting now as a futurist is not our future. That's not our future.
Right. You know, I think that was one of the things I've never noticed this until this past year was, hey, you know what? The day of the Lord is not just one day, because the day of the Lord is described as coming to different places at different times. And it's like, I finally start to understand, like, that the day of the Lord, and you think about it, what it says, it was in Amos that says, woe to those who desire the day of the Lord, because it's a day of darkness and it's not of light. So like, the people now are teaching that the day of the Lord is going to lead to the return of Jesus, when it's like, yeah, when the day of the Lord comes, you don't want to be there. When the day of the Lord's here, you don't want to be there. Like, you know, because that's the day when that place is going to be judged.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's why I'm really starting. It's really a stark contrast now of like what I thought before, is because there's so many prophecies of the day of the Lord regarding Israel when Assyria is going to come. When there's a day of the Lord, I mean, like I said, I think it's Ezekiel chapter 30 that I really noticed this now really easily. It's like the day of the Lord is coming to Egypt, and it literally says Nebuchadnezzar is going to be God's destroyer to come do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if the day of the Lord is a future prophecy, well, obviously it wasn't then, because you can see like all the prophecies about Egypt came true. I think it even says about like Egypt has, you know, like there's a remnant even from Egypt that are allowed to be saved. But it also mentions that Egypt will never be a powerful nation again. They'll be this middling kind of people.
Yeah.
Lots of the cities will never be rebuilt and all that stuff. And you're like, okay, so that happened. Like that
Yeah.
literally happened. So even if you don't want to believe that the day of the Lord regarding the book of Revelation, everything happened, you know that there was past book days of the Lord.
Yeah.
I think that now I'm starting to believe that the day of the Lord was like Sodom and Gomorrah. That would have been the day of the Lord for that people.
Yeah.
It was a day of judgment. It was a day of darkness and not light. And obviously there's descriptions, obviously, as you know, like Jesus telling them it's like the days of Lot when the stuff happens. And fire rains down, and it's like that's what happened. So it's like, so it's not unique to this place, and it's obviously the biggest deal is the day of the Lord described what happens in 70 AD. And if you realize that it's more about judgment of an unrepentant nation, it actually makes sense in that.
Yeah. And I think that just going forward, I think the day of the Lord is going to be that final culmination of Gog Magog being burned in fire, all the nations surrounding the camp of the saints, and then judgment. And that's, you know, it's like God wrapping everything up and saying, right, we're done here now. And this is the end for you. And the future of eternal life is for those who stood with me throughout.
Yeah, exactly. So so what I'm saying is that it, in that same way, I can say that the day of the Lord happened in 70 AD, but I believe another day of the Lord happened to the Roman Empire, because it wasn't the same day. The Roman Empire was judged after they, because in the same way that God used Nebuchadnezzar to judge Israel way back in the days of Jeremiah, he used him again in the days of the apostles. He used the Romans. Yeah. And then one day the Romans were judged in the same way that Nebuchadnezzar was gone, but the Babylonians were judged the same way that the Persians were judged by the Greeks. The Greeks were judged by the Romans. In the same way that eventually the Roman Empire was judged, it fell. And in spoilers, I was supposed to record a podcast, and we might be doing it like this weekend. Vitaly and I are going to talk about 536 AD, like the worst year ever.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to talk about like kind of like literally people talk about the fall of Rome happening then. And if you guys have not heard about 536, it's straight out of the book of Revelation. I mean, like the stuff that's described in that it's unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable if this is not an act of God. And it's kind of weird when we go through this thing to think like, they're going to try to describe it as some kind of scientific event, that like a volcano or whatever, but understanding that whether you believe we're in the little season or not, when the earth is put in this much distress, if you don't think that God is involved in judgment, like, I don't even know what to tell you. I mean, because you're saying like, do you believe in a God who's on the throne, who's sovereign? He did this for a reason. And it's kind of crazy to me to think that like some of the events of, that literally led to the Dark Ages were not something that God was involved in.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're scared of God. I think they're scared of Jesus. I think that's why everything is so underhand and so sneaky, because they have to kind of do things in such a way that is getting our consent to what they're doing. But they also know that there is a power that is way, way more than them. And they don't want to test that until they're ready, I guess.
So somebody said, so Jana says, I personally don't think Rome was judged nearly 500 years later. I don't disagree with you. And I think we're going to get into that in the podcast, is that I'm saying that I don't know. Like, all I'm saying is that the historical record talks about a year in 536 that was this insane, horrible time, the worst year ever. And I think it's interesting if it's possible that yes, maybe that was closer to the first century. And how would we know if it wasn't? I mean, if it was or it wasn't, we don't know. My point being is like, I do think it's interesting. And I know some people they get these, I'm not going to say they don't base it on scripture, but I think that some people say, oh, well, these things all had to happen in a certain time period, where I'm like saying, like, I know that the tribulation, which a lot of people say 7 years, the Bible says the tribulation is 1,260 days or 42 months. It's not, I think we're still trying to operate on a 7-year timetable. And I think that, again, it's interesting if biblical prophecy in history is cyclical, which I believe it is, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon judges Israel, and it's not for 70 years that they come back. So it's not late, I'm not sure exactly how long Babylon got to reign before Persia came calling. Medes and Persia came and took down Babylon. So it wasn't immediate. And I think in the same way, the Roman Empire, they didn't destroy Jerusalem and fall that same day. There was a time that could have been closer. But I do think it's interesting to go back to what I was saying about, isn't it funny how the whole story of Pompeii is beaten our head? The historical record, at least what they say, is Pompeii was destroyed by fire. Of course, they say it was a volcano did it. And I'm not saying God couldn't use a volcano, but that was destroyed in 79 AD. And this was like some corrupt town that was supposedly on the level of Sodom and Gomorrah, which I think is it's pretty interesting. I think I can't even remember if it was even like, was it Titus's son? I read a book about Rome, and it was Titus's son or somebody along that level of like the emperor's son was killed in that town, by a volcano.
Yeah.
Fire from the sky killed him.
Yeah. And I think just to the date thing as well, like when I talk about dates, I always, it's with a pinch of salt. I just say it because that's all we have. Like,
right.
Whether it's genuinely 1776, I mean, we don't even know what year we live in. So how can we possibly know what years anything else happened in, right? So I think they definitely have corrupted the dates, but, I think the historical record of something happening isn't necessarily out of the question. And if something was recorded, it's like that 1833 thing where all the stars were falling from the sky.
Mm-hmm.
That happened. Whether it was in that particular year or not, we won't know. But I think there are calling cards, like 1666 would be a year that definitely stands out for a few things. And I think that's how they kind of tag what they're doing according to their own occult schedule. But I don't think we're on the right year anyway. So
right. No, I think that's weird. We've messaged back and forth recently about this, and just saying that I'm with a lot of you guys about trying to reject a lot of the history we've been taught. We know there's a set of lies agreed upon, but I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's very difficult to believe anything if we reject it all. So like we're trying to do our best to say, does this make sense with the word of God? Like, does this align with it? And again, we can talk about these things without saying dogmatically saying, well, this history's for sure true. This makes sense. And what if this was closer? And I think Vitaly, that's one of the points he brought up in one of our first podcasts about the little season, was one of the best ways the devil could deceive people in this time is you take these events from the book of Revelation and you spread them out over a long timeline. They just look like bad years. Oh, that was a bad time. But if they were all together, if you could literally just go 1 to 1, and that's why maybe we'll never be able to identify the two witnesses, even, like a lot of us believe that Nero was, likely the Antichrist, but let's just say I'll agree that we don't have factual proof of that. Like we can't give you a 1-to-1 comp of everything. We're very far removed from that time.
Yeah.
We don't know how far, we don't know how close it was, but the point is, it actually makes sense that the enemy would do that. And lots of people, like with the Fomenko, he's done the work saying like the timeline has been corrupted.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit too simple to say it's been 1,000 years added or 1,000 years taken away, that kind of thing. But that being said, I believe rightly, that it's been manipulated, and the history we've been taught is for the most part false. But at the same time, that you're not going to give me a lot to do if I can't research it. If we can't research history, we're not going to talk about a lot if we can't research any of it, like reject it all. Let's just see what kind of makes sense.
And like, I think there's some really good points there. Like we can't trust history really, but if you know how the enemy works and you know that he's an arrogant, and they all kind of fall into this category: prideful, power hungry, rebellious entity and all of the people that are the foot soldiers of the enemy, you can actually follow that back through. Like it's like a thread throughout the stories of history. They always paint themselves as the heroes. So I don't know, maybe the heroes are the bad guys, and maybe we should look what did they actually do. And then so there's also like, okay, the 1776 thing. People are like, well, how do you know they were the bad guys? Well, just read it. Like, read what you have now in terms of your founding documents. And if you read it with your eyes open and you see, like the videos I've done show, you can read that with better understanding. Like the people are not you and me, for example. The people are actually the people that they're giving power to in the structure that they are, which is why countries are corporations. And, you see the results of all of these things. And it doesn't matter what year things happened. It actually matters that they happened, and you're living with the results of these things. So,
yeah, I've said, it's funny too, is like when you think about like in America, the revolution obviously is looked at as a very fun time of rah, 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 America. But I was thinking about like the Gadsden flag, the one that's literally a coiled serpent that says, "Don't tread on me," when Jesus gave authority to us to tread on serpents and scorpions. That's interesting that the rebellion was symbolized by a snake.
Exactly.
The ultimate rebel. And if you think about it again, it's like, so we the people, this freedom, the freest country. Okay, so how did the country buy up all the land and now we can't own any of it? You know what I mean? You think like, how free are we really? Again, as we go back to like the idea that the Native Americans didn't believe anybody could own land. When somehow all the land was bought up before we were born, and somebody owns it all.
Yeah,
that's a lot of, it's like a lot of land. I mean, like there's a lot of land that's not being used. Have you guys ever flown across the country? There's a lot of stuff with nothing on it.
Yeah,
but somebody owns that, and not you, not me. And I think, and you do kind of wonder, like you say, like they established a power structure, and when you think about it, like all these founders were like in secret societies. And again, the people who are credited with creating all the things, and it's like, yeah, they sure took credit for it, but did they actually do it? The founders.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting, almost biblically, when even God's telling the Israelites, you're going to go live in places that you like houses you did not build, and you're going to drink wine from vineyards you did not plant. And then you think about, like, is that what happened here? Yeah. And it's almost like the idea of like the Revolutionary War. What if, again, this is speculation time. What if the Americans, the founders, were not fighting the British? What if they were fighting the people who actually lived here? And you think about like the Native Americans, who were the Native Americans? Were they like what we were taught about, like Geronimo and these famous Native Americans? What if they were the people who founded San Francisco and Chicago and places like that?
Yeah.
Nuremberg, which is like Washington, D.C. Like, that's crazy to me, but it's like, that actually makes sense too.
Yeah, there's a whole thing, because they actually, I suspect that they actually intentionally peopled people across the Bering Land Bridge. I think they were being moved around. I don't think anybody who is located in any particular spot now is a native of anywhere. I think we've all been migrated around, which is why they continue to do this, right? Their migration is always a huge issue. Every generation has a migration issue. So I think they've been doing it for a long time to keep people in places where they want them to be. I think it's part of that population control. It's just their methods, right? They have to be in control. They have to be in power.
Or yeah, maybe it's a way of, again, it's like they serve the God of confusion. And so, like, again, if they can mix up the books of our Bible, they mix up our timeline, they mix up the people and the places, they spread people around, then obviously it's like, in America, obviously everyone who's paying attention knows about the southern border, right? And then you could imagine what they could tell those people about the buildings and the cities and how they got there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if they started to, again, the history books are changed, everything's different than they used to be. They could tell people anything. You know, it's kind of like if I moved over to Indonesia, they could tell me a lot of things. I mean, somebody like me, I might not believe them, but I mean, the point is, if you had never been someplace, you could ask them like, well, who built that temple?
Yeah.
And they could tell you lots of things. And I think that maybe that's part of it. Is like they want us to be confused.
Well, they took control of education right off the bat. Like that was one of the things they did. So what did they do? They moved all of these people that were living in these areas, like I could say here in Canada, and they took all their children and put them into education. To what? Re-educate them, obviously, right? Because they had to sever that tie from whatever they knew before and replace it with children are impressionable. So they had to replace that information with new information. And they did the same with all of us, to be fair, but they set up the whole education system to replace our God-given knowledge of things.
Yeah. And to put a cap on that, so it kind of is interesting when you think about like the topic being free energy. The guy who still, you know, the most famous person we know of who sold energy was John D. Rockefeller, who created the modern school system and the modern medical system too. So like if you think about the idea of like free energy healing and all that kind of stuff, all the things that you would now have to pay for if what we're saying is true, and it seems like likely that it could be true, that there are these healing centers, free energy, all of the things. And yeah, they're literally trying to do, like I said, I mean, I think that seems like to be the most obvious thing now. They've made a way to monetize things that were free.
Yep. And that's exactly that's kind of the point I was trying to make about the fourth industrial revolution, I think, was that they're capturing the air. They figured out how to industrialize the air. They're going to start taxing us on the air that we breathe, right? They have our water, they have our air, they have our land, they have our electricity, right? And now they're going to start taxing us on air, which is the fourth industrial revolution. And the fifth, if we look at that, you know, that elemental magic that they're doing, they want to capture the frequencies. So even now they can do like right into your skull. They can message you, right? So they can start putting thoughts right into your head.
We talk about like the neural link thing. I was just seeing like Elon Musk was just talking about that, saying that they've got hundreds of people, and before, like I think like 5 years, he was talking about having 10 million people having chips in their brains.
Oh, but I don't even think you need that. They can literally,
can
just put messages straight into your skull, right? Like that is something that they know how to do because they know how ether works. And I think ether is what carries packets of data everywhere. You just need an IP address, which is your location. And then they fix the signal to your location and they pass the data back and forth. We have Wi-Fi everywhere, right? So all of these wireless technologies are based on ether. That's why they have 5G, 6G going up everywhere. And it's not for our benefit. It's not going to turn out good for us. Like there's something to it that is going to make us debilitated in our ability to maybe even speak freely. I bet they can hear us even if we're just in a room on our own. They can signal straight into our IP and listen to us because there's Wi-Fi signals everywhere.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, and we probably got to close it out here soon. But it was funny. I just posted a video, and of course, I'm trying to build my backup account on Instagram because they're messing with my account lately. And I posted an old video where I was talking with Brian about Iron Man in the comic books became the Antichrist. I mean, it's absolutely insane that like I'm not even like that's not even me like saying, oh, it's a coded message that he became the Antichrist. Like, no, literally, they say he became the Antichrist. Mephisto comes from Mephistopheles. He's basically represented as the devil in the Marvel universe. Howard Stark is Tony Stark's father. He's like in the Illuminati in the comic book. I mean, like straight up. I mean, like again, this is not coded. This is like they're presenting this. Yeah. He sells his son soul to the devil. And then if you think about it, like the idea of like the song from like Ozzy Osbourne, I Am Iron Man, the Marvel movies. And a lot of people say that it seems like the modern interpretation of Tony Stark is like an Elon Musk.
Right.
And you wonder about that stuff. And you're like, is this they're kind of showing you like the way that they're trying to, the direction they're trying to go with society. No, I know, like I said, obviously people are talking about the little season. We don't believe that Elon Musk is the Antichrist. We don't believe that Donald Trump's the Antichrist. We don't believe that anybody's the Antichrist. There's still a spirit of Antichrist out there for sure. And I do think it's interesting, the idea of like iron and clay and the way that they're going to manipulate people through technology.
Yeah.
I think that maybe that's the overall message they're trying to show us.
Yeah, I think they're limited. I don't think it will necessarily go that way. But they certainly want us to think they can do that. Let's be honest, they use green screens for space. So I'm not sure that they're able to actually blend human organic with some kind of technology. They
No,
even don't do that very well.
no, I actually agree with you on that, because I do think that we give them too much credit at times. And I think, because like I say, because I think that lots of times when you actually see, they could show better satellite images if they were more adept on technology as they claim to be. Because you're like, wait a minute, yeah, like literally ceiling fan man. I mean, like it's his thing is hilarious, because like, yeah, there's literally satellites that look like ceiling fans. So so I'm with you, but I do think it's interesting, and maybe that's the whole idea of like the magic of it all is we're going to present this appearance of this illusion that we've got all this massive tech, but they're literally doing things through the spiritual realm, manipulating in a way that you think it's science, but it's really magic.
So the one thing I will tell you is that they can use frequencies to prep people to be traumatized. So think about 2020 when the build up to that, and then suddenly this thing happened and the TVs were showing us all these traumatic incidents happening, right? People were being primed prior to that, I believe, with frequency. So that the ultimate outcome of that was a very high compliance, right? So if you have access to the frequency that will start to control, I mean, why else did they take control of frequencies? Why did they get rid of all the bells? Why did they change all the music? It's because they actually want to make us compliant. They want to harness our emotions and our reactions to things.
Interesting.
So that when they do something, they will get the reaction out of us that they intend for us to do. And so I was quite interested that there seemed to be a whole population of people that weren't affected and a whole population of people that were. And it wasn't even really to do with watching the news. It was actually more to do with maybe something biological, or maybe it was Holy Spirit, or who knows, right? But
no, that's interesting. That's certainly interesting. Well, anyways, do you guys have any closing thoughts, Madeline? Obviously, all Madeline's links will be in the description. But yeah, do you got anything you want to close this out with?
I think just my channel I have not done anything on my channel related to this, because I like talking with people about it. I think it's more fun to have a conversation about it, but I will try and put something on my channel going forward in its own playlist. But I just want to thank you for having me on again. I really do enjoy these conversations, and I'll try and make available some of those documents that I was showing, just so that people can have those as well. I think it's important for everyone to get involved, start talking about these things, normalizing it, really, because the last thing they want us to do is talk about it more like it's normal. They want to keep it in its fringe space. They want to keep it kind of a weird, like, conspiracy topic. But if we just start normalizing it and just get it out there, it will be less and less weird, and we can start making some headway with it, hopefully. And I just don't want people to be deceived at the end of the day. So I hope this helps.
Well, amen. But at the same time, I'll piggyback on that. I'll say talk about it and research it, because I really do believe that this information is going to be harder to come by. Literally, as the physical evidence gets to disappears, as you say, and they were taking stuff down, the books are harder to find. I was even saying like that. If you talk about flat Earth or something like that, or you talk about the New World Order, there'll be a tag on this YouTube video saying, "Go to here to find the real information." I had a video on my social media that was taken down, or it was flagged as disinformation, talking about the mud flood. So there's only a matter of time before they're going to say this is archaic conspiracy theory. Big lead or somebody fact checked it and saying this is false. So there's going to be a time where people are going to be demonetized or taken off this platform for talking about it. So while we can talk about this stuff, please do your own research. Save the stuff to your backup drives and all this stuff. And because I really do think it's important. I think that we're trying to piece together a puzzle with pieces missing, multiple puzzles. So we need all you guys. And I think that I'm sure you can attest, there's so many people who are doing great research in the comment sections that are telling
I
us like
know.
telling us where to go. So we really appreciate you guys. We appreciate you guys hanging with us tonight. And obviously we hope to do it again soon. So we love you guys dearly. Thank you all for the super chats. You guys are awesome. Can't thank you enough.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys. God bless y'all.
Bye.
Yeah, that was good. I think that went pretty well.